Hello, hello! So this is the How to Make Terraria clone series continued. This is where we left off. And I've actually done some work in the background. So I want to show you kind of where we're headed. This is where we're headed. We have a lot more terrain. We have collisions. And it knows when we're on the ground and when we're off the ground. Now, to go from the first thing I showed to this, we do have a bit of work to do, and some of it is not intuitive. But without further ado, let's start. So over here in the blocks header file, where we're generating the terrain, drawing it, and initializing, instead of doing an offset here, what we really need to be doing is randomizing its location. However, we also want it to be within a set bounds. We are not worried about chunking right now, just simple terrain generation. Now there's a few ways we can go about this. So up here in the hash include, and don't do this part yet, I just want to kind of show you, there is I believe a CSTLib so CSTDlib, this include file, it has something where we could say like srand and then have like a 0 here, and there's some type of randomization within this library. I think there's another include we would have to use as well, and I've used that include in the past, and what I have found is it is very, very bad at actual pseudo randomization. So it seems to be random, but within a certain parameter. Now, lucky for us, C++ comes with a hash include random. So if we do this, now this class has what is called a Mersenne twister random number generator, and to be honest with you, I've never heard of that. No clue. And while talking with ChatGPT, I learned that okay, that's actually super powerful. And so we need, like I was saying, to randomize position. So instead of saying set position to whatever this is here, we need to set it to a kind of like, you know, a random x and a random y. So that's what we're going to put in between that. So I'm going to come down here, and I'm simply going to say int random x location, and same for the y. And then we can take these and do here. So we have a random x and a random y, but we need to set these values. Also, we're no longer going to need this offset. So how are we going to determine this? I'm going to create a whole new function up here, and we're just going to call it randomize. It's going to return void, and this is going to handle all of our fancy shit. So from what the research I've seen showed me is we have what is called, like, it's like from the standard library, a random device, and I'm going to call this RD for random device. Not the best naming thing, but to keep this closer to the example code I have near me, this is what we're going to use. Then we have a standard, and this one I have no idea to be honest with you, but it's like MT19993. Yeah, so it's, who knows what the heck that even is, and we're going to call it generator, and then do these little parentheses, and inside we're going to say RD, more parentheses, This second part, this is the Mercian Twister randomizer, and this first part is the random device for the seed. How this works, you got me, but trust me, this is kind of the path we're going to take. Now, this next part, I kind of understand. We're going to create a vector, and inside this vector, we're going to have the SFML values int rect. So int rect like that. And how this is going is we need a list of these rectangle positions, so to speak, and we're going to call them spawn zones. We're going to have this equal to, and in here we're going to kind of set up like a weird little system. So inside another set of curly brackets, I'm going to put 25, 150, 5,220, and 550. So what the heck, right? What is even going on here? Well, this is about like the minimum X location, the minimum Y location, the maximum X location, the maximum Y location. That's relatively what that is, from my understanding. Right below this, we're going to look at kind of how to set this part up. Like I said, this is not intuitive, and it is quite strange. And so, from the research, it shows that we need like a standard uniform int distribution. So, uniform int distribution, and this is going to take in an int. We're going to call this zone distribution. And inside the parentheses here, we're going to have a 0. We're going to go to spawn zones dot size -1. I'm not quite positive, but I'm thinking this means we're going from 0 to however large this is, -1. That's like our distributed zone. Best I got for you. Like I said, this part was generated through ChatGPT and some questions, and it's a little funky, but it produces good terrain for the most part. There's a lot of adjustments we're going to have to go from here though. So after this, we have a chosen zone index that we're going to save as an int. So chosen zone index. We're going to equal this to the zone distribution, and we're going to put generator inside of that. So that guy. Again, this syntax is kind of weird. Just roll with it. Here, we're going to have a auto variable reference called chosen zone. And it's going to equal to spawn zones at the chosen zone index. And that's kind of where the, since spawn zones is a vector, this is an element within inside the vector. We're saving that into here. And a couple more odd ones. So we have 2 more distribution things. And it's just like this. So I'm going to copy, come down here, I'm going to paste it. We're going to call this zone X. So zone X. And then inside our parentheses here, we're going to go chosen zone dot left, chosen zone dot left again, but this time we're going to add our chosen zone's width. So, and from what I can tell, because indirect is typically what I would use for sprite sheets in SFML, it has a top, a left, a width, and a height. And so from here, we're declaring zone X to utilize the left plus the width. And that makes a lot of sense because we're talking about the X direction. And so for the Y direction, I think it would be zone Y. This would be top. And this would be top plus height. So top and height for the Y direction. Now that we have this set up, we would simply say our random X location that we declared at the bottom in the beginning is equal to our zone X at the generator for the so again here it's almost like declaring a function in a lot of ways, almost, and it's going to take in a parameter. That parameter in this case is generator. Who knows about the random device? It's a whole lot of weird shit going on. But again, zone Y and random Y. Now, if we come down here into our initialize, we have this set up, but we haven't called this function. And so for, if the block size is not 0, for the amount in our block size, we're going to want to randomize. So each block is getting kind of like a random value. Then we're going to set that position. If we go over in game.hpp, where we are declaring how many blocks we have, we can kind of see what happens here. So if we hit play, alright, so they're kind of sparsed over there. And if we do 1,000, so we got a lot. And notice, here's a couple of the weird things. So if we walk to the left, we're going to kind of jump up on these things. But we do have some gravity, and this is just definitely not what we want. Also, the camera does not follow the player, and it looks like I can no longer jump if I hit space. So let's start with the player. If we go, I just want to double check. Yep. Alright, so how we have player being inheriting from basic entity and setting up all this stuff, we're going to kind of do a very simple component system, like an entity component system. So I'm going to create a struct, and in this case I'm just going to call it camera. And in this struct, we're just going to say void set camera. And for setting the camera, we do need to know the window. So I'm going to make a reference to the render window, and we need to know what thing we're attaching to. Now in this case, since this is going to be part of player, but it doesn't know about what player is, we're simply going to pass in a rectangle shape reference and call it body, because player itself has a body, and that'll attach. Down here, we're going to set up a view, and we're just going to call it view, and we're just going to say view dot set center and body dot get position, and then window dot set view. So So this will set this view to the center of the player, and then the window will use that view. Now down here in player, we're going to need a reference, or not a reference, but like an instance, and I'm just going to call it cam. The kind of tricky part here is I don't want to how you say, like, I don't want to rewrite drawable. Like, I don't want to override it. That is inside basic entity. This is kind of, you know, how we have it active right now. So what I'm going to end up doing is inside of game header, inside of the drawable, I'm going to come here, I'm going to say player, and then I'm going to push a dot. It's going to change itself. And we're going to look for cam, and then I'm going to do set camera. And remember, we need to take in a window and a body. So in this case, player dot body. And if we hit play, now the camera follows the player. Now this collisions is to be desired, and this is one of the more, I suppose, complicated areas that I also had to look up a lot on. And there's a few things that are a bit tough, at least for me, thinking about this. Just kind of checking. Alright, so inside of game.header, we have an on collision. And this is kind of like what we're doing right now. This is not going to do us, unfortunately. And even so, technically a lot of the stuff we should do should be here. However, we're just not going to worry about implementing this part quite yet. That will be probably for the next video. Right now, we're going to do a very big rework and put it in the wrong place, but it's going to work. So this is a lot of stuff. And so, as a full disclosure, while dealing with terrain generation, I was talking with ChatGPT. I was struggling, and it gave me this for the collision. As you can see, like, what the heck, right? So let's think about this really carefully. So what it gives us is a bool to check the ground and check has collision. Then it does a kind of like a for each loop, determining for a block within our block's vector. Ooh, excuse me. Then we're going to say if the player's global bounce intersects with that block, set has collision to true. Our float rect to the player bounce is our get global bounce. And then block bounce is this. So this part pretty straightforward. It's, instead of saying this a bunch of times, we're just kind of saving it in a variable, setting a has collision to true. This part is a little tricky. I'll just kind of leave it like this for a second in case people want to write this down. But we have a overlap area. So we're saving it as a float. We're using a minimum and a maximum. And the minimum is the left plus the width of both sides subtracted by the maximum of the left. And that's our overlap area. And so that's mathematically, in a lot of ways, like if let's say we're talking about radial collision, if the radiuses of both objects together is less than the distance between them, they are colliding. This is basically doing the same thing, and it does look disgusting, but that's what's going on. And so here we're saying if the overlap is greater than 0 in the y direction and the x, if overlap y is less than the overlap of x, then we're going to check if the player bound's top is less than the block bound's top. And here we're setting the position of the player in the x to where he originally was. And for the y, we're taking into account the block bound's top and the player's body's y position or y size times 2. Reason we're doing times 2 is inside a basic entity here. I thought it was actually nah. Yep. So over here in block, because both block and player are basic entity, notice we're setting a scale 2 by 2. And so I try to maintain that 2 scale because size isn't going to take into account the scale. And here we're setting the vertical velocity to 0. We're saying, hey, player's current state is on ground. On ground becomes true. Otherwise, set the position to this in the x and y. It's like determining the block bound's top and its height using the player's x position, and again setting the velocity back to 0. Now, if the overlap y is greater than x, or equal to, because that's where this will kick in, then we're asking the question about the differences in the lefts. If the lefts in the player bounds is less than the block bounds, then we're setting the x position based off of the block bounds, and then using its current y position. And so we can think about this as if the player is on the left side and he moves right, we need to determine that left bounding spot. If he's on the right and he's moving left, or right, but in this case left, we have to maintain checking for that collider. A little bit lower, within this big for loop still, we're calculating another float rect. So this is kind of redundant in some ways, right? Because we already have a player bounds. And it looks like here that player feet is exactly the same as player bounds. So perhaps this is something I need to take a closer look at. But if we calculate the top plus its, set this, it would be, we're adding and setting equal, right? So player feet dot top plus player dot height is equal to player feet dot top. Then we're setting the height to 1. So if the player feet intersects with the block bounds, on ground check is true. This is required to kind of reset our jump. I'll remove this after one test and kind of show you guys. So inside of just the function itself, outside of the for loop, we're saying player is collided is equal to has collision. So over here in basic entity, where we're doing this, actually not even when we're doing this, we're checking this one is collided. So this bool is useful, and that's why I wonder if we should put a lot of this inside of this function here. Going back to game.hpp, so we're setting that to has collision. Remember, has collision is set up here, determined. If the on ground check is true, if the player is not in the air, then he's on the ground. Otherwise, he's in the air. So if we hit play, and we're kind of trapped in here. So what I'm gonna do is go over to here to player, and we're gonna try like 0. See if where we end up. Okay, yeah, so a little above. But as we can notice now, oh, there's just a little bit of a collider there. As we can notice, like, if we move left to right here, since there's a little difference, we're colliding between both. We can jump, collide back and forth, and when we are not colliding with something, we will fall. And yeah, I do apologize for the convoluted code. I would like to have been able to figure this out completely by myself. However, it's very complicated. A lot of moving parts, and we're just beginning. As we can see, this is not kind of like a terrain that we're gonna have. I mean, this is just, it kind of has some caves, but again, the top ground isn't as consistent. We're gonna have to figure out a way to destroy these blocks. We're gonna have to figure out a way to chunk these blocks. But for now, this is a pretty decent setup. We have a camera that follows the player. We have quite a large terrain. And we have collisions that can work left to right, and I believe up and down. If I can try to get under one of these. So let's try. Oh, looks like my jump will fail me. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. Thank you for watching the series. This has been a great learning experience for myself. It's very nice to be able to take SFML and do different things with it. But yeah, thanks for watching.